Here we will examine some of the functions of a few of the skull structures, beginning with the external acoustic meatus, which is a small opening that's found in the lateral aspect of the temporal bone. This opening leads to the ear canal. The zygomatic process is a bridge-like extension of the temporal bone that connects the temporal bone to the zygomatic bone. This structure allows for the passage of some of the major muscles of the jaw to pass from the temporal bone down and anchor to the mandible. The jugular foramen are a set of circular openings that are found between the temporal and occipital bones on the underside of the skull. These function as passage for the internal jugular veins to drain blood from the brain and for passage of some of the cranial nerves from the brain as well. The carotid canals are small circular openings that are found on the inferior side of the temporal bone, also on the underside of the skull, which function as passageways for the internal carotid arteries that take blood to the brain. On figure 7.5, we have highlighted the zygomatic process, in addition to the external acoustic meatus, both of which are structures that are found on the temporal bone. Figure 7.8, with a view of the underside of the skull, highlights the jugular foramen at the boundary between the temporal bone and the occipital bone, in addition to the carotid canals. Next, we'll examine the foramen magnum, which is a single large oval opening that's found on the inferior side of the occipital bone. This foramen functions as the passage for the spinal cord to connect to the brain. The occipital condyles are rounded articulation points on the inferior side of the occipital bone, which is also visible from underneath the skull. The occipital condyles are found in close proximity to the foramen magnum. These condyles function as part of the joint between the skull and the vertebral column. Next are the optic canals. These are small rounded passageways that are found in the middle side of the sphenoid bone, facing the orbits. These function as passageways for the optic nerves from the eyes to the brain. And we also have the perpendicular plate, which is located within the nasal cavity. This plate is a downward extension of the ethmoid bone, and it forms the nasal septum along with the vomer bone. Returning to figure 7.8, we highlight the occipital condyles and the extremely prominent foramen magnum. Figure 7.4 returns us to the anterior view of the skull so that we can see the optic canals within the sphenoid bone at the back of the eye sockets, in addition to the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone that's visible within the nasal cavity. The remaining few structures we will not be able to see within those diagrams, however we can still discuss their functions. The hypophyseal fossa is a small indentation that's found in the sphenoid bone on the interior of the skull. The fossa functions to support the pituitary gland that is found at the base of the brain. Next is the cribriform plate, which is a flat region of the ethmoid bone that's located between the cranial cavity and the nasal cavity. It supports the olfactory bulbs of the brain, which have short olfactory nerves that extend from the bulbs into the nasal cavity. And then we will also finally discuss the cribriform foramina, which are small passageways that are found within the cribriform plate. And the passageways allow for the passage of the olfactory nerves from the olfactory bulbs into the nasal cavity.